welcome everybody to the webinar. This is the final webinar in this particular series, and we're looking at the APM Registered Project Professional designation today. We are Novare Consulting, and apologies for those of you who've listened to all the webinars. We are going to tell you a little bit about ourselves over the next couple of slides. We are an accredited provider for APM, but we're also a consultancy organisation as well. So we support our clients as they deliver business change, and we also train both in the certified methods and in the bespoke methods that we design specifically for our clients. We're Chris and Sian Ferguson. We set up Novare Consulting as part of a midlife crisis back in 2002, and Chris particularly has contributed to the development of some of the leading global methodologies, including Prince2 and Managing Successful Programs, and he's recently been involved in the reshaping slightly of the APM PQ. My involvement has been primarily around competence frameworks. I've worked with APM to develop the second edition competence framework, and also on career structures, coaching and mentoring. We've recently added Myers-Briggs type indicator reports and feedback to our portfolio to support people as they go through their project management career. It can be particularly useful for those who want to improve their communications as they move into the complex project or program environment. Our certifications are here on the screen for you to see. So although we're certified and very proud of our involvement with APM, we're also certified by AXELOS, who own the Prince2 and ex-Cabinet Office suite of qualifications. We're certified by PMI and indeed by APM Group International. The other new qualification this year for us has been with the Bid and Proposal Management Association, and there we support our clients as they win their projects and programs through tender and bids. Sorry about that. So these series of webinars have been all about your project management career journey, and as Matt says, what we've been trying to describe to you through the series is how you can move through using the APM certifications to support you as you develop in your project management career. We started with the APM Project Fundamentals qualification a few months ago. Then we described the APM Project Management qualification to you all, and then last month we described the APM Project Professional qualification, and today we're describing the APM Registered Project Professional. And we very much are in support of APM's new development of creating a structured career progression through the qualifications for project management, and we think that the APM has done a lot of really good work in this area. So we're thinking about our next step after Project Professional Qualification, or PQ. And this is the step in our career where we move from thinking about non-complex projects into thinking about complex projects or indeed programs. So with that in mind, we felt the decision at this point is whether to think about managing successful programs as the next step, or whether to think about the APM Registered Project Professional as the next step. This is an important decision. It's really the next big step up for a career. The first big step up being as you move into project management for the first time, and then the next big step up as you move into areas of increasing complexity. So this is a big decision point for a project management career. And what we thought was that managing successful programs is a fantastic qualification and body of knowledge. It provides delegates with a project management framework to use, and it's very much designed to deliver complex change, focusing on benefits realization and driving the change through vision and blueprint, complete with clear governance. And it also provides organizations with a structure for their transformational change. So you'll see very much that managing successful programs is there to support organizations as they think about delivering complex change. But as many of you who've been on training courses before will know, It's when you're attending the training course, you gain a lot of fantastic knowledge and a good feeling for the subject, and our feedback statistics from managing successful programs specifically shows that people really see a huge jump in their knowledge from moving from non-complex projects into the world of programs or complex projects. And so it is definitely giving a big knowledge jump to take something like managing successful programs. However, what RPP provides is a validation of your competence for delivering, for your experience of actually delivering those complex projects, programs or portfolios. It has been designed to be a pan-sector standard. That means it applies to any organisation, whether it's in the public sector, the third sector or a PLC. It's very much a designation that validates your career in terms of both practical experience and knowledge. So in other words, the APM RPP is really unique in the market. It is all about you and your career and your intent to have that career and experience examined by your peers to see if it meets the required standards for the RPP. So it's very different from the other qualifications that exist in the project management world. And we think that RPP is actually complementary to any other program management or portfolio management certification, because as you know, when you're managing your projects and programs in this complex environment, you'll need a method, a route map for delivering that change, and that method might be something like managing successful programs, or you might use the PMI's program management approach. Whichever approach that you use, you will need some skills to help you deliver that change successfully. And you might gain those skills through training. It might be accredited training or indeed bespoke training. It might be training from external organisations such as Novare Consulting, or it might be training that you gain internally in your organisation. But together with that training, and at this point of your career, this is really, really important, you do need to complement that training with your real-life experience of managing complex projects, programs or portfolios. And then we come to the driving test. So the driving test might be a knowledge and competence in terms of understanding a method, such as managing successful programs or PMI's program management professional qualification. But we think that the APM RPP designation very much complements that knowledge qualification, because it is all about an examination of how you have delivered the programs and projects that you have been responsible for in your career. So what are the key features of the APM Registered Project Professional? As we've already said, it's a pan-sector standard, and it's been designed to demonstrate responsible leadership and competence. It's been updated, and it's now based on the APM Competence Framework 2nd edition. And this has been really good work to bring together the suite of the qualifications, all based around the body of knowledge and the 2nd edition of the Competence Framework. In addition, the RPP really embodies the APM's 5 dimensions of professionalism. And for those of you not familiar with the APM's 5 dimensions, they are the breadth of knowledge, which is covered by the APM's body of knowledge. There's the depth of knowledge, which is covered by the APM Competence Framework. And then there's achievement is the 3rd dimension, and that's covered by your qualifications. And then there's commitment, which is covered by your continued professional development. And lastly, but probably most importantly, there's accountability, which is covered off by your membership of the APM and your adherence to the APM's Code of Professional Conduct. So, as we've already said, the RPP is there to validate your PPM career. You will be assessed by your peers, and you are putting your experience on view for them to critique and to validate. It's been designed to raise the bar of professionalism. It's the first designation out there in the project management community looking at your experience by competence and by knowledge. So who is it for? Well, it's primarily for those who hold the APM PPQ or the APM PQ who wish to develop themselves further, but they still have to be working in a complex project environment. Or it's for those working in the complex project, program or portfolio management environment with over 7 years experience. And if they have no APM qualification beyond, for example, something like APM PMQ, this would be the route that these individuals would need to take. So this Technicolor diagram describes the route through to the RPP. We can start off through the experiential route with our statement of 7 years of experience, or we can come through the developmental route with proof of having attained the APM PPQ or the APM PQ. But remember, for both of these, we will need to evidence that we're working in the complex project, program or portfolio environment. The next phase is to go and produce your written submission. This must be supported by 2 referees, and we would really advise that you ask your referees as soon as you start planning to achieve the RPP, rather than leaving this to the last minute, as has been our experience when we've been coaching some people through this their RPP application. The written submission comprises a number of sections in the form, and we're going to go through each of those sections in a lot more detail over the next few slides. If the written submission is successful, then the next stage will be an interview with 2 RPP assessors. As I understand, this can be face-to-face or through video link, and it typically takes 45 to 60 minutes. And again, we'll describe the interview procedure in a lot more detail later on. When you put forward your application to become RPP, you will need to provide a log of your CPD, continual professional development, and your acceptance of the APM Code of Professional Conduct. And once you've successfully achieved all of those things, you will then become an RPP, and your name will appear on the register of RPP that's on the APM website. So you can see it's a very comprehensive process to achieve RPP. It's not something that most people can achieve over the course of a few days. So it does represent a great deal of commitment by yourself and by your organisation to see you through to attaining your RPP successfully. So one of the first things that you need to do if you're applying for the APM RPP is to download the guidance from the APM website. And the application, this is your written submission, has 5 sections. The first section is your personal details. The second section asks you to determine your route, whether that will be experiential or qualification. The third section is around your continual professional development. The fourth section is about the projects and programs that you've worked on. And the fifth section is some competence statements that you'll need to describe in relation to the projects and programs that you've already worked on. So again, this is all about you. It's describing your career in terms of competence, and it's understanding what those competencies mean so that you can provide evidence to the RPP assessors that you are able to have the designation of RPP. So section 2 of the form is the route to the RPP, and in that section you'll confirm your application route. On the experiential route, the project overview must give evidence of working on complex projects, programs or portfolios for at least 7 years. Now there is a slight caveat there. So for full members of the APM they have already demonstrated 5 years experience. So if you've been a member of APM for 2 years, then you will only need to show evidence of 2 years worth of working on complex projects, programs or portfolios. But there is a minimum of 2 projects, programs or portfolios that must be described in section 4. And then section 5, if you're going through the experiential route to RPP, you will need to complete the competence questions in full. If we're going through the developmental route, in other words, we have either the PPQ or the PQ, then Section 4 only needs to contain an overview of 2 of the complex projects, programs or portfolios that you've been working on. Because this route means that you don't have to evidence a minimum requirement in terms of years of experience. And then in Section 5, the competence questions only need you to evidence your practical competence. In other words, you won't have to fill in the knowledge section that we'll have a look at in a little bit more detail as we go through the webinar today. So Section 3 describes your annual commitment. So every year as an RPP, and indeed as you apply to be an RPP, you'll have to provide a log of your CPD. And what is very important for APM is that you're thinking and planning your continued professional development and thinking about it in terms of a range of activities that support that development. And then every RPP must continue to confirm that they will act in accordance with the APM Code of Professional Conduct, and that's available to download from the APM website. So I'm going to hand you on to Chris now, and he's going to describe sections 4 and 5, starting with an overview of project complexity.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar from me. So in terms of complexity, we've used that word a great deal, and this is the stepping stone into RPP. The evidence you need to provide is that you are working in a complex project, program or portfolio, although I haven't yet come across a non-complicated program or portfolio. But in terms of complexity, there are certain features and characteristics the APM consider to reflect complexity. I know that people have written PhD theses on this topic of complexity, but these are the ones that count with regards to the RPP. First of all, what were you personally accountable for? So in other words, clarity of the role that you had in terms of the change initiative, project or program. Other factors might be the degree of uncertainty. So did you start off with completely unclear scope? You had maybe multiple stakeholders, maybe they had conflicting objectives, or indeed competing interests as well for that matter. Perhaps you were working in an international environment with a complicated supply chain. Perhaps you had multiple public sector stakeholders or international charity bodies playing a part in this. Perhaps you had multiple funding sources for your project or for your program. So all of that plays to the complexity of your project or your program. And of course you can get a very large project as well as you can have a large program, so it just depends on the structure that you chose to use within your organization as to how that was undertaken. And lastly, I guess it's around leadership and organization and teams, because some of the question sets that you have to answer, which we'll talk about in a minute, reflect the ability of you as a leader of projects and programs, as much as you would be a manager of projects and programs. So your leadership becomes an important factor to consider. The project overviews you must provide, minimum of 2, maximum of 5, and as Sean has already described, the 7 years experience versus the qualification route level of experience, you must have that complexity built into the projects. So I always remember interviewing somebody to prepare them for the RPP, and they said I was running a £3 million project to automate some rail equipment. And that of itself doesn't sound that complicated. So we moved that forward into that project impacting on to improve the average journey times of 2.2 million passengers a year, and suddenly the context changes. So sometimes it's not just about the budget size, it's about the impact the program or the project has on the stakeholders concerned. So you need to draw that out in terms of the project overviews itself. The list below simply reflects those complexity elements we've just described. Maximum of 400 words, minimum of 250 words per project. So there's a lot to get across in actually a relatively short period of short statement of words. Most of you who have been involved in projects and programs will follow the philosophy of, if I had more time I'd have written less, to try and squeeze everything in that you know about your projects and programs into that word count. But the word count is indeed strict. Then we move on to the competence questions. The reason I like the RPP is the first qualification that actually talks, as Sean has already mentioned, about you and your experience. And this is where a lot of people find it quite uncomfortable to talk about them and their own personal experience. You find people are drawn into either making statements in answer to the competence questions, and the same is also true in the interviews, of saying we planned our project, then we executed our project, and so forth. Whereas actually you should be using I planned the project, or even more so, I led the team to plan the project. I set a PMO up to plan the project in a complex environment. So what did you actually do? And that's the way in which the competence questions must be expressed in order to get across to the assessor that you've actually done this job, you've actually undertaken this level of accountability and responsibility in that complex environment. What the competence questions are structured into are sets of questions. There are 5 of them. We'll quickly step through those without reading them all to you because we're short on time, but obviously that detail is in the guidance you can download and also in the slide share that you'll see subsequent to this. And basically you pick a project or a program and answer a set of questions on that project or program. That's what you need to do. There are statements in the written submission based on questions framed in the question set that you must answer. And there are practical competence questions that, regardless of the route through which you applied, you must answer. The breadth of knowledge questions are only answered by those people who come through the experiential route. And that requires some evidence about what you have done. It confirms your practical experience, reflects what you did, what the results were, and all the rest of it. So there's practical competence ones. The breadth of knowledge questions are about your understanding and appreciation of alternatives, different options that may have been available to you, different structures, different life cycles, and those sorts of aspects. How are the questions, when written down in the written submission, how are they judged? They're judged on this scale. The practical competencies start off well, you get 0 marks if there's insufficient evidence. In other words, you've written something that simply misses the mark completely. And as you can see, without reading them all to you on the screen there, the one that I would focus on absolutely for every written submission is to try and gain a level 3 in terms of the marks, where you've evidenced that you performed the function without the support, so you were in charge, you had accountability, you exercised significant responsibility, you were empowered to do so by the organisation that commissioned you to deliver the project. Examples where you may not have done everything, but you led the team to do something are perfectly reasonable things to do. And remember that all of the answers need to be aligned back to the APM's competency framework, which is terribly important in terms of how you phrase your responses. I'm very conscious always that different organisations have very different language for describing project management. But this all links back to the APM's competence framework in terms of how you articulate your answers to these questions. But for each individual one, always gain 3 marks. That's where you should shoot for anyway in the first place. In terms of the knowledge marks, those of you doing the experiential route will need to evidence that you know your subject. So the competence ones are what you've done, and these ones are what you know questions. And again, you aim for level 3 here in terms of in-depth knowledge of principles and methods sufficient to assume responsibility in widely differing circumstances. For example, who knows about risk management? Are there different ways of managing risk, of assessing risk, of looking at probability and impact? You could introduce alternative techniques, root cause analysis, Monte Carlo analysis, and so on and so forth, just to evidence that you have that in-depth knowledge of alternative views, techniques, and principles. So, to proceed to interview, you need to have scored a provisional overall mark of 3 in 4 out of the 5 question sets. And as I say, we'll look at the question sets in a minute. So there are 5 question sets. For 4 of them, you need to get that mark of 3. And for the one that's left over, a provisional overall mark of 2. So you haven't quite made the grade of 3, but you're there or thereabouts. Anything less than that, and your submission will be returned. It's not hit the benchmark needed for RPP. The other aspect of this is the APM Code of Professional Conduct has got to be referred to in the context of how you answer questions. Professionalism, ethics, compliance, they need to be reflected in entirely the right way in the evidence that you provide, that you've done things in the right fashion. Anything that conflicts with that will be rejected as well. So you can see the Professional Code of Conduct is very important at the RPP level. Here's the first question set. I don't propose, by the way, to read all these out. They are available on the SlideShare afterwards. I'm just conscious of our time. But as you can see, we've got a slightly different set of questions to which you need to submit your written answers. If we pick one around resource management, how did you secure the necessary resources required for delivery? This is about your real project or program. And here you're looking for evidence about complexity, about whether you had to select suppliers to get resources, you had to go through a weighted supplier framework, whether you used a complicated supply chain, what structure you used internally, were you functional, matrix, or project-based as an organization, how did you negotiate with the internal functions? So it's understanding the complexity of that and what you did. A useful technique is called the STAR technique: situation, task, action, and results. So it's not just what you did, what was the outcome. So the purpose of these questions, framed in the practical competencies, are to try and get you to surface enough evidence to score that mark of 3. Similarly with the breadth of knowledge questions, you might pick up what methodologies could be used to prepare the consolidated plan. And there are a whole wide range of different techniques for that, depending on the part of the plan you are trying to consolidate. You might use complex software to consolidate schedules and resource plans. You might use risk management tools in terms of consolidating risk. So it's understanding how you would consolidate that plan, integrate it, and make sure the internal elements of that plan, as complex as it was, are internally consistent. You might also explore different methodologies. So some of you might operate using life cycle methodologies. Some of you might operate using PRINCE2 or MSP, some using APM, some using an in-house methodology. What alternatives might there be to have structured that plan and executed that plan? So that's the first question set. And as you can see by the topics, that's all around what you might loosely term planning. The next 2 questions are on stakeholders. And as you can see, by the way, at the end of the questions, at the end of each of these slides, it's 250 words per question, per statement. So it's not a lot of words to fit in what is quite a lot of information. So in terms of stakeholders and communications, practically, have you ever had stakeholder conflict? How did you resolve that conflict between stakeholders? What did you do? What were the results? What did you learn? It's all of those aspects of it. But it's all about what you have done. Then the knowledge options may be around options to do if stakeholder interests are irreconcilable. And if they are irreconcilable, what are the options and alternatives you could do or have knowledge of that you could achieve a program outcome by? The next one is all around managing. So what sort of reviews, quality management, benefits management, a couple of questions in there around change control in terms of variations that you didn't go ahead with and variations you did go ahead with. So some interesting set of questions there to evidence your competencies on. And again, there's a bunch of knowledge questions in there about alternative arrangements to things like quality management and benefits management, because both of those 2 are subsequently linked together. You do fit-for-purpose quality outputs, deliver fit-for-purpose benefits based on the outcomes you've delivered from your complex projects and programs. The 4th set of questions is around effective leadership. 2 questions around leadership, as you can see, for practical competence. What have you done to build the trust and commitment of stakeholders and team members and align them with the needs and objectives of the project or program? And the second one around creating that right working environment. And the real nut of that one is what was the result? Did it work? What did you learn? What would you do differently? It's those kind of responses that people see. Just a bit like having an interview but writing down all your answers is how I would look at the practical competencies. And you can see for yourselves the breadth of knowledge questions required to explore that for those coming through the experiential route. The final one is around teams. So we've got leadership and teams as 2 of the 5 question sets, which is not a great surprise given we're trying to evidence not just your ability to manage complexity, but here leadership and team working becomes a much greater competence in terms of its importance, simply because of the complexity involved in what it is that you've been responsible for executing. And as you can see, you can think about developing the competencies of the individuals in the team. It's expected if you're leading complexity that you may have coached people, developed people, nurtured people, made them more competent, and those sorts of aspects. How did you avoid conflicts within the team? So you might know about conflict resolution models, but this is about what you did. not just about your knowledge of theory. What did you actually do? The knowledge question on conflict management, of course, would be all around different options available. So here you can draw on things like the Kilman model of conflict resolution with 5 options, and then explore the alternatives and practically what they would mean. Not forgetting the fact you've got to squeeze all this into 250 words for each of the answers. Having done all of that, that's 3,750 words if you weren't counting, and that takes a long time. We provide coaching sessions to get people through this with very effective track record of results, positive results and successful outcomes. And what a lot of people find is it takes a long time to actually piece together all this evidence and finesse it in the way that it needs to be articulated for the RPP assessor to rate you as a 3. Once you pass, you get to the interview. And I know you all enjoy interviews. You're probably at the stage in your careers now, if you're thinking of RPP, where you could be interviewing other people. It's time to get your own back, you might think. But here's where you think about being interviewed again. And it's a bit like being interviewed for a job is the way I would approach it. It needs to be professionally answered, professionally undertaken. 45 to 60 minutes, some photo ID required, of course. But there are 2 people. What they're not trained to be is good cop and bad cop. They're trained to extract evidence from you to support further the application you've made for the RPP. And their job is to ask you open questions to which you can respond with further evidence of what you have done. That's the basic drive of the interview. You will always get a question on your application of professional or ethical principles. So whilst that's not written in your application form, it's expected as a code of conduct, and you need to prepare an answer to that particular question about a time when you've handled and dealt with an ethical problem or a concern. The APM Code of Professional Conduct, read that before you prepare your answer to that interview question. Be fluent at it as well. The provisional marks from the written submission will be reviewed, and the pass-fail criteria, it's the same set of marks essentially that people work on who are our assessors. In terms of the RPP training approach, as I said earlier on, we offer coaching sessions with small groups in a workshop environment. And some of you may be thinking, why would I need help in filling out a form? But it's not filling out a form. It's expressing in a way that you will score the marks to gain a designation that provides the evidence that you need that you are competent at delivering complex programs and projects. And for those of you using the experiential route, that you have the necessary knowledge to do so, aligned with the APM's competence models. We have a very successful track record of getting the best results out of this approach. And clearly I'm going to say at this moment, I'm going to hand you back on to Sean now, but if you're interested, please get in touch with us after this particular session.
Thanks very much, Chris. And just to wrap up Chris's summary there, basically the score of 3 is very much aligned to the advanced level in the APM Competence Framework. So you have evidence of the practical experience, but you need to be able to critique and offer alternatives in the knowledge section. So you're not just basically always following the same approach, you're thinking about how to improve an approach and take it on a little bit further. So the benefits of the RPP, we've already discussed them briefly. So it is the pan-sector standard for project program or portfolio management. It's been designed to raise the bar of PPM professionalism, and I hope that you can see that through the webinar this lunchtime, because it's not just about knowledge, it's not just about proving competence against the method, it's about what you have done and the fact that you've been willing to be assessed by your peers to show your competence and experience and indeed knowledge. And it is growing in recognition in the industry. Corporate members are very keen on the RPP and it's growing in popularity. And of course, we want you to be part of the APM, the largest project management professional body in Europe. So the next steps, are you ready for us to roll out the red carpet for you as a registered project professional? If you are ready, then you need to be thinking about how you're going to plan your route to achieving the RPP. Of course, you can achieve that designation with no support from training providers. Alternatively, you can seek support from training providers that support your application. As Chris said, what we do is very much in line of coaching, and indeed a little bit of mentoring as well. So we will support you through the whole of your application process, provide a desktop review of your written submission, and then help to prepare you for your interview. But we can't do it for you. But just to go back on what Chris has said, it is very challenging to express your career rather than chronologically on a CV, but in terms of competence. And so when you're doing this the RPP application, whether you're doing it just on your own or with some support, it is very much that demonstration of competence that you need to be drawing out from your career, not just saying in 2002 I worked on the ZB55 project, because that will mean nothing to your RPP assessors. You need to explain what the ZB55 project was all about and how you demonstrated competence against the standards shown in the RPP. So that wraps up our section on the RPP, and we thought that as we're coming to the end of the series of webinars that we do a bit of a review of everything that we've discussed in this series of webinars. So the key message to you all is that you are in the driving seat for your PPM career as you go through this journey. And successful project and program and portfolio managers are committed to continuous professional development. You should always be thinking about how you can improve both your knowledge and your experience as you progress through your career. And none of us are too old to learn, and you know, even Chris and I at our very advanced age are still learning every day. And qualifications are increasingly important in our new chartered profession. It's a very exciting time for the profession of project management with the advancement of charter. And through the series of webinars, we've thought about the important decisions that you'll take around the qualifications and the journey that you might take through your developing your certifications in your career. We've considered the qualifications from AXELOS, we've considered the qualifications from PMI, and indeed we've considered the qualifications from APM. I think that the conclusion has been that most of the qualifications are largely, well, APM qualifications are complementary either to AXELOS or to PMI, as they very much focus on the tools, skills and techniques that you need to deliver your project programs and portfolios, whereas the AXELOS qualification sets mainly focus on methodologies and frameworks, which are also incredibly important. And we need to reflect back against what makes a successful project management delivery. It is that route map, it's the tools and techniques plus experience, and then being prepared to go through a benchmark, a driving test with examinations. But why would we choose the APM qualification set? And I think that you can see from the series of webinars that the qualifications have now been developed in line with the new body of knowledge and the Competence Framework, second edition, to really provide a progressive, coherent career path for project management professionals. They are not random qualifications that are sort of thrown in as part of a development. They really provide a clear structure for you as you progress through your career. They are, because they focus on tools and techniques and skills, they will be compatible with any methodology that you might use within your organisation. And we need to remember that APM are the largest project management professional body in Europe and the largest member of the International Project Management Association. So the APM influence is right across the world, right across globally. So we think the route to a successful project management career is through taking each of these qualifications in turn, and we really hope that you select Novare Consulting so that you can achieve success in your APM project management journey. So thank you very much for joining us in our webinar series. We've very much enjoyed partnering with APM in this, and now I think we're coming to the part of the webinar that we hand you back to Nat for the questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon and Chris. We've had a couple of questions on charter, one of which is quite a good question to answer, is does the APM RPP lead to the APM chartership? And as I said, there's been a number of other questions that sort of mirror the link between RPP and charter. So Are you guys comfortable with answering that question?
Yes, fine with that. In terms of the Chartered, it's under development right now, the Chartered Project Professional, and it's consultation during the summer of this year to get with a broad group of stakeholders, followed by the development of the actual chartership itself, and the timing of that, I think it's due to be launched in early 2018. So in terms of the connection between the two, there's no doubt that the RPP and achieving that designation will contribute substantially to getting the Chartered Project Professional designation. There are likely to be other elements that one would need to do in order to achieve that chartership, but that's all down to the consultation and the output of that.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that, Nat?
No, I think that's fine. It's just to clarify that I guess the point that it's expected that currently people that hold RPP will have met the required competence standard for any future chartered standard as and when that's launched. The next question, referring to your submission for RPP, must the referees be APM members?
No, the referees don't have to be APM members, but they have to be relevant to the projects that you're putting forward as part of section 4 of the form, if you remember the slides that we've just been through.
Thank you, Sian. The next question is RPP a globally accepted standard, or is it only within the UK?
Well, I'll try and answer that. So if I go wrong, Nat, you do feel free to correct me. So at the moment, the RPP is a standard that is only recognised within the UK. However, APM who own that standard are members of the International Project Management Association. Therefore, any standard or designation that APM put out, it means that it is acknowledged to be in line with the IPMA, even though it might not be an internationally recognised designation in its own right.
Thank you, Sian. Just to build on that point, some companies will use this standard internationally as a standard for their senior project managers, and so within certain employers it will be a recognised standard wherever you are, whether you're working. Moving on to the next question, is there any time limit for the CPD element of your application?
Yeah, the CPD must cover 35 hours in any given year, and that should form part and parcel of the application. So 35 hours in 12 months.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on to the next question. Can you provide more detail on the definition of a complex project opposed to a non-complex project?
Yeah, well, the headlines we put out on the slide explaining complexity. It's really around, it's just not a straightforward undertaking. What we're looking for is multiple stakeholders, conflicting interests. It may not always necessarily be the size of budget of the project, though clearly something in maybe the hundreds of thousands just sounds non-complex from a project standpoint. But you can have, as I used an example of a small project with a very high impact in terms of the rail project that I mentioned. So I think in terms of complexity, it has to be, and there's a sense of judgment around that. If you look at all the criteria set out in that particular slide, use some judgment to exercises whether you've met that.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on to the next question. Does an MSc in project management compensate for the breadth of knowledge element of the application? I'm
afraid at the moment the only exemptions are for the PQ and the PPQ, but I'm sure that Nat's taken some notes, and you know, we don't know how that's going to develop, but at the moment only the PQ and the PPQ demonstrate the breadth of knowledge for the qualification, for the designation, even for RPP. And I think because this is very much an APM designation, the MSc is a fantastic achievement, so congratulations to whoever's asked that question. However, in project management, it is very much the variety of competencies that you need to demonstrate that are being looked at here, and also the technical applications and information that you get from some of the qualifications provided by the professional bodies that still hold a great deal of sway in our industry.
Thank you, Sian. Moving on to the next question. This is a sort of direct question for you in terms of your training provider service. And the question is, do you have an RPP coaching or training schedule available in the Aberdeen area?
So because the RPP is very much around potentially just an individual. If you're interested in Novare Consulting coaching you through your application, please just contact us and then we arrange the coaching session at a mutually suitable time. It tends to be small groups at the very highest numbers, but more often we coach individuals because everybody has a very, very different journey through to RPP. And we would travel to you, maybe in Aberdeen, or do the coaching via WebEx, if that was preferable.
Thank you, Sian. So moving on to the next question now. It is, what type of CPD do I need to present, e.g. webinars, project management courses, etc.?
So CPD takes a number of different forms, as I'm sure you all know. Clearly things like project management and related topics in terms of webinars, courses, SIG events, in terms of the APM SIG events that people go to. So those are practical things to recognise. But in addition, periods of self-study around standards, methods, reading project magazine even counts. But don't put 35 hours of reading one project magazine because that lacks credibility. What you may also choose to add is coaching and mentoring others, or being coached and mentored yourself in the workplace. So think about those opportunities as well. And if people have been trained on sort of project management software and solutions and things of that nature, that would all contribute. So it's quite a sort of broad spectrum of permissible activities.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on to the next question. If a submission for RPP is rejected with feedback at either a written or interview stage, can you resubmit by changing your responses based on the feedback?
Yep, I'm happy to answer that question. Thanks, Matt. Certainly at the written stage, you're allowed then to resubmit, taking into account the feedback. And the feedback is usually constructed very helpfully. As Chris said, there's no good cop, bad cop here from the RPP assessors. People are trying to help you work towards achieving your designation. So I actually can't answer the second part because all the people that we've coached have never failed an interview stage, but I'm guessing that they could go back. Nat, is that correct?
Thank you, Sian. Yes, that would be correct. I guess the point to put across is that the feedback is given from a genuine perspective. Obviously, some people won't necessarily be at the required standard, but if the feedback is advising the applicant of something and the applicant does that or has that attribute, then yes, you can obviously reapply and use the example given in the feedback, or use the knowledge you've gained from that feedback. Moving on now to the next question, which is, why are corporate members keen on RPP?
Well, from our experience, corporate members are keen on RPP because it's showing that the investment in training and improving a project manager's experience is actually being validated by peers from across the industry. So it's not just an examination of knowledge or the ability to show competence against a particular method, it's showing how you have delivered your complex projects and programs successfully, and you've chosen to be validated in your approach by your peers. So it is a form of assessment for corporate organisations that isn't provided by any other qualification in the market.
Thank you, Sian. The next question will involve a bit of reading from myself, so it's quite a wordy question. I understand for the experiential route, applicants need to answer the breadth of knowledge section. So if a section comprises of 3 questions for each of the practical and the breadth of knowledge areas, does that mean that the word count is 1,500 as opposed to 750 words?
Yes.
Yes.
Very short answer to a long question. Yes.
That's fine.
It's 250 words per question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
So the next question, if you say, or in the presentation you say APM qualifications are complementary to AXELOS and PMI, does that mean that they cannot or do not stand alone?
Well, of course they stand alone in a qualification set as in their own right, but there are other qualifications out there that lots of organisations use, a multitude of qualifications to provide training to their staff, and there's been quite a great deal of work done on showing the complementary nature between both, say, Prince 2, particularly in the APM PMQ. So it can actually work both ways. You could say that does Prince 2 stand alone without APM PMQ, for example. So they both stand alone in their own right. However, they do complement each other as they focus on slightly different approaches. We need to remember that project management is a huge, wide area covering a great deal of varying competencies. So it would be unlikely that any one qualification was able to cover off absolutely everything in project management.
Cool, thank you, Sian. I think that's quite an important point for people to realise that although all of these qualifications are complementary to qualifications provided by other organisations, they do also stand alone, and many people will follow a mixed route, and many people also follow a pure APM route. On to the next question. I was wondering if someone only has the APMP qualification but has the 7 years of work experience, how many of those years need to be in complex projects?
Well, the evidence needs to be 7 years of working in complex projects, 7 years experience.
However, if you had your full membership of the APM, then that accounts for 5 years of experience, so you would only need to evidence 2 additional years. So the APM P as was, APM PMQ as it is now, does not provide any exemptions for the RPP experiential route, but membership of the APM does provide a slight exemption.
Thank you, Sian.
Right.
Yes, there's been a sort of flurry of questions coming in, and I don't think we're going to have time for all of them. But very quickly, going through as many of these questions as I can. One question is, will PMO qualifications be recognised?
In context of attaining the RPP, there are only 2 exemptions for the RPP development route, and those are the APM PQ and the APM PPQ. So although PMO qualifications are fantastic, I'm afraid they don't provide exemptions to the RPP.
Thank you, Sian. We had a couple of other questions on that sort of point, so I think it is worth us clarifying that now. Another question that's come in is, who is responsible for recording their CPD?
The individual is responsible for recording their CPD. Remember, you're in charge, you're in the driving seat for your project management career, and it is up to you to record your CPD. There is a template available from the APM website that shows you the structure that you should be putting forward as part of your application.
Thank you, Sian. Another question related directly to the services you guys supply, which is, is it potential for you to run workshops in London to assist with the application process?
Yep, certainly. We have done quite a few in London, maybe not so many in Aberdeen as per the previous question. However, yes, we do definitely provide services in London very frequently.
Thank you, Sian. I thought that would be the case with London, that would be a popular area.
It's the case with the whole of the UK?
Yeah, certainly.
Yes.
With Novare Consulting, we deliver training throughout the UK and in the US, Australia, and indeed Europe as well. So we do, maybe not in every single country where there's an IPMA association, but certainly in very many of them.
Thank you, and it's good for people to hear that you have that reach. So the final question for today, in the previous version of the RPP standard, there were some good sample questions and response answers. Are you aware of anything like this being available now?
From what we know, nothing like this is available now, because the structure of the set of questions, the 5 sets of questions, has changed from the previous submission. I think you can see there are maybe 1 or 2 areas that coincide with what was previously considered a good answer, but the evidence of complexity has shifted in terms of the evidence that the assessor would be looking for, as has the content of the answers itself. So at the moment, because the RPP version 2 is relatively new off the blocks, there's no bank of good example answers to the question. But that's something that we can basically help people with and build that with people over time.
I think I'd just like to add as well, the change to the RPP means it's very much focused on you and your career and your project. So I think that the questions that are being asked now really need a more individual approach rather than, I don't think APM or indeed accredited providers would be comfortable with people just using a bank to get a good answer from it. It really needs to relate back to your projects and your experience.